This is apropos. On the eve of crunch trade talks, Donald Trump is again voicing optimism that a deal can be reached with Xi Jinping when he meets the Chinese president in South Korea on Thursday. Global markets will be watching closely to determine whether the pair can draw a line under a tussle that snarled supply chains and unsettled businesses the world over, as Yinka Oyetade reports.
For days, US President Donald Trump has been successfully charming allies across Asia. But his biggest test yet comes in Seoul Thursday when he meets Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit, a leader unlikely to be easily swayed. At stake, whether the world's two largest economies extend their fragile trade truce or plunge back into economic hostility. Trump, though, appears unfazed.
Tomorrow morning is the one that most people find most interesting, and I think we're going to have a great meeting with President Xi of China, and a lot of problems are going to be solved. Okay?
You're optimistic?
Yeah, very optimistic. The relationship with China is very good, so I think we're going to have a very good outcome for our country and for the world, actually. I think it's important for the world.
The two sides are under pressure to extend their trade ceasefire set to expire in November. If talks collapse, both nations could reimpose tariffs of more than 100%, levels US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent once compared to a trade embargo. Tensions escalated further this month after Beijing proposed new curbs on exports of rare earth minerals. A possible deal may see China delay those restrictions. Washington, meanwhile, maintains a 20% tariff on Chinese imports, citing Beijing's failure to curb chemicals used in fentanyl production, a drug responsible for more than 500,000 deaths in the US. But China says it wants to cooperate.
China expresses sympathy with the American people for the fentanyl crisis, has provided assistance with positive results, and remains open to continuing cooperation with the US side. The US should take concrete actions to create the necessary conditions for cooperation between the two sides.
Also looming over the talks, Taiwan. Some analysts fear Trump could offer concessions on the self-ruled island, which US law obliges Washington to defend. It's been 6 years since the two leaders last met in 2019. The world may have changed, but one thing hasn't. Washington and Beijing are still locked in a battle over trade, and the stakes remain as high as ever.
To discuss, we're joined now by Robert Manning, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Centre's Global Foresight Hub and China Programme. Robert, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. A big test awaits Donald Trump, as we heard there. He says he's confident he's going to be able to reach a trade deal with China. Would you share that optimism? And who actually has the upper hand heading into these talks?
Well, I think what produced this was a series of events, mainly that I think Trump has come to, and the Trump people have come to the conclusion that these tariffs with China are not sustainable, that they had in the past underestimated China. And when the Chinese raised the question of rare earths and passed these really mirror image export controls borrowed from the US that really micromanaged the flow, and threatened really all things electronic, from cell phones to jet fighter planes. That got Trump's attention. And I think what we're seeing is a sense that they have to sort of manage this relationship better. And so I think what we're seeing, they've agreed, from what I understand, they've agreed to a number of things. The things that matter to Trump are the guarantee assurances on the role of rare earths, fentanyl, which is a huge political issue for Trump's base in the United States, that the Chinese have been cooperating to some extent, but I think they're going to further lengths from what we hear. And of course, soybeans, because China is 50% of the market for American farmers on soybeans. So those are the things that Trump got. I think Xi was looking for predictability and stability. And so I think he's interested in stabilizing things and kind of buying time because he's got his own domestic problems.
When China, though, has such a monopoly. Is she likely to budge on those threats to expand curbs on exports of those rare earth minerals? We've been talking a bit about this a lot over the last few weeks.
Well, I think the Chinese may have overplayed their hand in the sense that they control 90%, about 70% of rare earths, but more importantly, 90% of processing and refining. So they have the ability to really hold the world hostage. So I think that in that sense, they made Europe and a lot of other places in the world nervous. And I think what we're seeing is they're offering Trump to suspend them or rethink the export process, control process, and so on. Um, and we'll see where it goes. I think this is really more of a temporary truce, right? What's important are all the underlining issues that are not on the agenda. They're not talking about uh, subsidized overcapacity in manufacturing. That's a huge problem. The currency issues is another big one. So, and the underlying strategic competition over technology and dominance in the Asia Pacific. So those things are still out there. All those sources of tension have not been resolved.
And if this is only a temporary truce, then, as you suggest, what kind of impact is all of this and the ongoing uncertainty likely to have on the rest of the world and a potential global trade war that everybody has been worrying about since Donald Trump came back to the White House?
Well, let me say this. I think it's all fragile, and one Trump tweet on Taiwan could blow the whole thing up. But having said that, I think we may be seeing a new stage in the evolution of U.S.-China relations, in the sense that this is going to be followed by an exchange of summitry. Trump will be going to Beijing early next year. Xi is supposed to come to the United States. And so I think what they're trying to do, they're starting to define the terms of competition and to manage it. So if that's the case, I think this may be more than a truce. We'll have to wait and see it play out. And as I say, it could blow up at any time. But I think both sides are looking for a little more stability. You saw what happened when the Chinese did the rare earth uh, suspension, that markets in the U.S. tanked, and that got Trump's attention. It's probably the one thing that does.
And Robert, you mentioned Taiwan there. Do you think those regional tensions over the island are going to be discussed? The US Secretary of State saying that Taipei essentially has nothing to worry about here, but isn't it possible that Trump might offer some kind of concessions to China?
Well, I think Taiwanese and a lot of China hawks in Washington are very nervous. Um, she would like to have some kind of reassurance on Taiwan from Trump. And I think Trump has been very ambivalent about Taiwan. He's prevented a visit and stopover by President Lai recently, and a number of other small things. He sees Taiwan as an irritant to some extent, and they've been pressuring Taiwan to invest more TSMC chip making facilities in the United States. And I think to the extent they do that, Trump may consider that making Taiwan less important, because what he mostly cares about is the chips.
Well, do you think then that the Asia Pacific region is going to remain a strategic priority for the US under Donald Trump?
Well, that's an interesting question, because they're soon to release a national defense strategy. And I think the Trump administration is much more focused on the Western Hemisphere. And the reports are that this new strategy will identify the Western Hemisphere and homeland security. They're already seeing all this military activity. 14% of the U.S. Navy is now in the Caribbean. And many people think they're preparing for some kind of regime change effort on Venezuela. There's a lot of hostility, regarding Cuba. They could also be putting pressure on Cuba, and so on. So, and we're already seeing an emphasis. They just announced withdrawing troops from Romania, for example. So I think you're seeing something of a shift in strategy from our traditional Asia and Europe centrality.
Yeah, because a lot of commentators say that, this kind of saber rattling that we're seeing coming from Donald Trump, it's pushing other Asian nations and even countries here in Europe towards China rather than the US.
Yes, I think Xi Jinping sees Trump as a gift that keeps on giving. You know, his crusade against renewable energy and EVs is essentially facilitating China's dominance in the future of energy and transport and handicapping the U.S. On that front. I think with the shutting down of Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and so on, that irritated China. And I think the tariffs themselves on all of our allies, India and Brazil, for example, has pushed the global South more towards China, and made their rhetoric seem more credible. So I think there are a lot of consequences we're only beginning to see.
Yeah, and if these talks don't go well on Thursday, what might happen then?
Well, I think that it sounds to me like, as I say, they've reached some understandings. I don't think they have an outline. There are details left to be sorted out, and it certainly could unravel. But I think Trump's optimism is not unfounded in terms of the short-term trade truce that they seem to have reached.
Robert, thanks so much for being with us. We'll have to leave it there for now. That's Robert Manning from the Stimson Centre's Global Foresight Hub.